She kicked me out on Christmas. My own daughter, standing on the porch with a wreath behind her, telling me to leave. And I did, with a trash bag of sweaters and a tin of cookies, while the neighbors' lights blinked like they were applauding. I'm glad you're here with me right now, because I need to say this out loud to someone who isn't going to pretend they didn't see what they saw. If you have a minute, take it with me. Let me breathe, and I'll take you back to the beginning of that day, and the days that led me to that doorstep, to that cold step, to the part where I realized the worst thing wasn't being sent away. It was discovering why. It happened in a small town where Christmas had rules. You put your decorations up the first week of December. You drove slowly down Elm to admire the blow-up reindeer. You brought cookies to the church swap even if they came from a store, and you just dusted them with powdered sugar to make them look homemade. I'd lived there most of my life. I worked the front desk at a hardware store on Route 9, where I knew the regulars by the sound of their boots. I wasn't glamorous or important, but I was steady. I had routines, and people counted on me to remember which drill bit fit which stubborn screw. I counted on that too, because it meant I mattered in small, ordinary ways. Then, late in the fall, the new owner came in with his clean watch and his laminated charts and said the word restructuring, like it could be folded up and put away in a drawer. I nodded when he talked because I was raised to nod while people talked. I even smiled. But my body felt like it knew the conversation wasn't about progress. It was about subtraction. 2 weeks later, I had a cardboard box with a stapler and a mug and a note from a kid who'd learned to sharpen his first lawnmower blade at our counter. I said thank you. I kept saying it so I wouldn't say anything else. I tried to hold on to my apartment. I really did. I made a chart of my bills and circled the ones that could be delayed. I stretched soup. I stretched pride. I started answering the phone with a brightness that sounded like I had options lined up, even when it was just another spam call trying to sell me a warranty for a car I didn't have. But December rent wanted numbers I couldn't conjure. My savings were thin and old, like the socks I kept mending. My daughter, her name is Nora, had been nudging me for months. Mom, just come stay with us. It'll be cozy for the holidays and you can look after Daisy while I'm at work. Daisy is my granddaughter, 4 years old. A comet in sneakers, soft hair that always smelled like apple shampoo. The kind of child who looked at you and made you feel like you were the best view in the room. So I said yes. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself it was fate's way of giving me a season with my granddaughter. I told myself lots of things. Because sometimes that's how you keep moving forward. You tell yourself a story and walk inside it. I folded my life into 3 boxes. I left a note for my landlord with a candy cane taped to it. I put my keys on the counter and pressed my palm flat there for a second. The way you do when you want a place to know you loved it. The first night at Nora's, the guest room smelled like sun-dried sheets. She'd put a little tree on the dresser, the kind with battery lights that winked so gently you felt your eyelids want to match them. We ate leftover pizza and talked about the pageant at Daisy's preschool. I told stories about customers at the hardware store that made Nora laugh. She said, "You always make things feel lighter," and I tucked that sentence away like a warm stone in my pocket. We didn't talk about my job. We didn't talk about what I would do in January. We didn't talk about how long temporary can stretch when no one measures it. Sometimes you hold off the truth with kindness. Sometimes kindness is the truth you can manage. In the mornings, I made coffee before everyone woke up. Sometimes I stood at the window with the mug between my hands and watched the neighborhood do its little winter ballet. The man across the street pushing his old snowblower in a cloud of his own breath. The bus sighing to a stop, a dog shaking jingle bells off its collar. I felt useful. I walked Daisy to school, and she held my gloved finger like it was a magic handle that could slide the whole world along. I learned the names of other parents, other grandparents, and everybody looked at me like I belonged there. That's all I wanted, somewhere to belong that didn't cost money I didn't have. When Nora's husband, Darren, came home from work, he'd set his briefcase by the bench and squat down to let Daisy barrel into him. He'd kiss Nora's cheek and toss me a cheerful, "Hey there, Ma." He had the kind of smile that photographs well, the kind that made you forgive him for telling the same joke twice. I noticed he kept checking his phone, though. Not a big thing. Everyone checks their phone. But sometimes he turned his body away from us when he did, like the screen was shy. At the time, I filed it in my head as one of those new habits people pick up without meaning to. At the time, I had bigger dragons to feed, calling unemployment, writing a resume after 30 years, telling myself I was not too old, not invisible, not stuck. Christmas swelled around us. We hung paper snowflakes from the ceiling with tape that didn't want to hold. We made a chain of red and green links and counted how many were left. I repaired a stuffed rabbit whose ear had split at the seam, and Daisy looked at me like I was a surgeon, like I'd saved a life. We did normal things. Quiet things. I made my mother's ginger cookies. I put 2 aside in a tin labeled for Santa, because you can't let a childhood contract lapse. Not when a 4-year-old is watching the terms. And still, there was a small tightness in me that didn't match the lights or the music. I would be washing a cup and suddenly I'd feel it, like a knot on a rope, right where your hand keeps catching. I told myself it was just the worry of being a guest. The worry of not paying. The worry of overstaying a welcome that had been generously offered. And maybe it was. Maybe worry is never only about one thing. But even as I smoothed the worry with chores and small jokes and lists of jobs to apply to, something else kept showing up at the edges. A sentence cut short when I entered a room. A look that crossed between Nora and Darren like a shadow bird. A conversation that swerved when I reached for my mug. On Christmas Eve morning, I woke before everyone. The house was dark and soft, the way a house is when it's keeping secrets for children. I padded to the kitchen and found a note on the counter in Nora's handwriting. Mom, we'll do stockings after breakfast. Can you prep cinnamon rolls? Love you. I smiled at the love you. I pressed a fingertip to the loop of the Y, like I could feel the warmth through ink. Then I opened the fridge and found that my Tupperware of stew was gone. It was a small thing, but it wasn't where I'd left it. In its place, a new container I didn't recognize, with a deli label and a date that didn't match any shopping trip we'd made. My brain made a polite excuse. Maybe they ate it late and replaced it with something else. But my ribcage knew better. My ribcage felt a tremor, the kind of tremor you feel right before the truck hits the pothole you didn't see. I went on with the morning. I rolled the cinnamon dough and spread the cinnamon sugar like I was frosting a worry I didn't want to taste. Nora came in with bed hair and thanked me. Darren came in and upped the thermostat and kissed the top of Daisy's head as she streaked through the room in snowman pajamas. We were fine. We were a Christmas card. And yet, when Darren's phone buzzed and he turned his shoulder away, Nora looked at him with a flicker that said something I couldn't translate. Not anger, not fear, not quite guilt. Just a flicker. And then it was gone. I should tell you that by then, the letters had started. Not bills. I wish it had only been bills. These were envelopes with my name spelled wrong, or with no return address, tucked under the door. The first one I found on a Tuesday, fresh snow on the stoop. Inside, a single printed line. Some people don't know when they're a burden. I didn't show it to Nora. I told myself it was some neighborhood teenager with a mean streak. I tore the paper into snowflakes and let them fall into the bin. The second one came the following week. Christmas is for family. I told myself the same thing. I told myself not to make drama out of paper. I told myself people were bored and ugly and it had nothing to do with us. I told myself so many versions of calm that I forgot calm should feel like breathing. Not like holding your breath. Christmas morning started with laughter, with paper flying, with Daisy shrieking over a plastic tea set, and Nora pretending to sip invisible tea with her pinky up. I took photos. I sent one to my sister with the caption, "I'm okay." I meant it. In that moment, I was okay. Sometimes you are, even when the floorboards are whispering about a crack you haven't found yet. The stew didn't matter. The letters didn't matter. The phone didn't matter. That's what I told myself as I held my granddaughter while she put a sticker on my nose and declared me officially festive. After lunch, Nora asked me to take a short walk with Daisy to look at the house 3 streets over that did a light show synced to a radio station. "We'll clean up while you're gone," she said. Her smile had edges, but I didn't want to see them. We bundled up. We walked, we hummed. I carried Daisy part of the way when her boots got heavy. We stood in the cold and watched a house blink and dance and pretend it was an orchestra. When we came back, the living room looked different. Cleaner somehow. The tree seemed taller. There was a bag by the door, a black trash bag, the cheap, thin kind that shushes if you touch it. I knew that bag. I'd bought that box myself, in the kind of optimism you feel when you think you'll only need it for leaves. "Mom," Nora said from the entryway. Her voice had a tremor so delicate you could miss it if you wanted to. "Can we talk on the porch for a second?" Daisy tried to follow, but Darren scooped her with a practiced move that felt too smooth, like choreography they'd rehearsed. "Hey, Bug, let's show Nana your tea party after," he said. I stepped onto the porch. The air bit my cheeks. The wreath smelled like last year. The neighbor's icicle lights made a soundless glitter. Nora didn't look at me at first. She looked at the snow in the corners of the steps. She looked at a point somewhere over my left shoulder, like the horizon might give her courage. "I think it's time," she said. Just that. 4 words that didn't fit in my ears. I waited for the rest. The explanation, the apology made of marshmallow words. The soft padding you wrap around a blow so it won't bruise as much. She didn't offer it. She reached down and picked up the trash bag and held it out to me like you might hold out a donation, like you might hold out a life jacket. "Darren's parents are coming," she said, and the way she said his name told me it wasn't the whole reason, just the approved reason. "We need space. You said this was temporary." I looked at the bag. It had my sweaters in it, my old flannel with the missing button, the tin of Santa cookies I'd iced with a toothpick. "Where would you like me to go?" I heard myself ask, and my voice sounded like someone else's, someone careful and light and floating an inch above the ground. She swallowed. "Just for a couple days. There's a motel by the highway. I can help later." The word later trembled like a bridge that hadn't been tested. I remembered the letters. I remembered the stew. I remembered Darren's turned shoulder, the flicker in Nora's eyes, the way they had cleaned the living room too fast, too thoroughly, like they were vacuuming evidence. And still I wanted to rescue her from the thing she was doing. I wanted to take the bag and say, "It's okay," to make her the child again, and me the mother who absorbed impact. That's what we train ourselves to do, mothers. We become cushions for other people's sharp corners. But the porch was cold. My hands were cold. My heart was cold in a way it hadn't been since the day at the hardware store when my name disappeared from the schedule. A car drove by, tires whispering on salt. Somewhere a wind chime clinked. Inside the house, Daisy's voice rose and fell, and that was the sound that made me take the bag, because I didn't want her to see anything break. Nora opened her mouth like she might add one more sentence. She didn't. She closed it. She put her hand on the doorknob and hesitated like she wanted to touch my arm and couldn't find the map to do it. I walked down the steps because movement felt easier than standing still. I didn't cry. Surprise can be a clean thing before it turns to grief. At the curb, I turned back, and the door had already closed. I looked at the wreath. I looked at the window where the tree glowed like nothing painful had ever happened beneath it. I looked at the bag in my hand, and it looked back, round and shiny and full of things that were mine and not mine anymore. I told myself, just reach the corner, then decide. Sometimes that's how you keep going. You break the day into corners. At the corner, the wind cut sideways and carried the church bells from 3 blocks away. I could feel the edge of something I didn't understand pressing at me, an edge I was about to trip over whether I wanted to or not. Because as I stood there, trying to decide between the bus stop and the motel and the kind of pride that won't buy you a warm bed, my phone vibrated. A new text, no name, no contact photo, just a number I didn't know, and a message that made my stomach drop through the frozen pavement. "Check the attic before you go far. He hid everything up there." I looked back at the house. I looked up to the small square of the attic window, dark as a held breath. And a thought came, unwelcome and electric. Whatever pushed me out hadn't started on the porch. It had started above my head. in the place where old things and secrets gather dust. I tightened my grip on the bag, turned back toward the house, and felt the first real shiver of the truth waiting for me on those stairs. When you lose a job late in life, the silence that follows is louder than the noise of work ever was. That's what I remember most about the weeks before I moved in with Nora. The quiet. It wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of quiet that made you hear every drip in the kitchen and every creak in the floor, like it was asking what you were still doing there. Before everything fell apart, I had what you'd call a comfortable small life. A little one-bedroom apartment above a bakery. The kind of place that always smelled like bread even when you hadn't bought any. Every morning, I'd wake up to the sound of the baker unlocking his door downstairs, and I'd start the day with coffee that always tasted a little burnt but felt like ritual. I'd drive my rusted Corolla down Route 9 to the hardware store, park in the same spot, and wave to the same two men from the auto shop next door. Routine gave me meaning. That's the truth of it. I wasn't chasing big dreams at 61. I just wanted to matter in the small way of being expected somewhere. After work, I'd stop by the library, sometimes to return a book I hadn't finished, sometimes just to talk to the librarian, Sandra, who always pretended not to notice when I rechecked the same mystery novels. Life was simple, a string of predictable beads on a long thread. I didn't know that thread was about to fray. I'd raised Nora mostly on my own. Her father left when she was 7, chasing a different kind of life, I guess. Back then, I was working 2 jobs, mornings at a diner, evenings at the store, and every night I'd sneak into her room just to watch her sleep. I used to tell her, "You're my reason." She'd giggle and say, "Reason for what?" And I'd say, "For everything." She grew up fast, smart, responsible, almost too much like me. She married Darren right after college. They bought a nice 2-story house in a newer part of town. All grays and whites, clean lines, the kind of place that smells like lemon polish and ambition. For a while, I thought I'd done something right. I'd built a daughter who didn't need to struggle like I had. And when Daisy came along, that joy washed over everything else. Still, I kept my distance. I didn't want to be the kind of mother who hovered. I visited for birthdays, helped when they moved, sent money for Daisy's preschool even when Nora told me not to. I liked to be useful, you see. That was my language of love. Then, when the job ended, the silence grew teeth. I told myself it was only temporary. But you can only stretch pride so far before it thins into fear. When Nora offered for me to move in, I said yes with a practiced smile. The kind that hides the tremor in your voice. "Just until I get back on my feet," I said. She hugged me like it was no big deal. But that hug, now that I look back, felt like something was already tight in her shoulders. I didn't notice then. I didn't want to. Her house was beautiful in that magazine way. Everything had a purpose, even the throw pillows. The guest room she gave me had a window overlooking the backyard, where a wooden swing hung from a maple tree. The first night I stood there watching the wind move the swing just slightly, and I thought, this could feel like home. We settled into a rhythm. I helped with cooking, cleaning, school runs. I didn't mind. It gave me purpose again. When I saw the way Daisy's face lit up when I picked her up from preschool, it filled the quiet parts of me. I tried to stay out of Nora's marriage, too. They were busy people, both working long hours, juggling schedules and deadlines. Darren worked in finance, always with that sleek look, hair never out of place, voice steady like he was giving a presentation even at the dinner table. Nora managed a small dental clinic. She'd come home exhausted but still smiling for Daisy's sake. I admired her for that. But as I began to settle in, I noticed small things. The kind of things that don't shout, they whisper. A message on Darren's phone that made him step out of the room to take it. Nora, late one night, sitting in the dark living room staring at her hands like they were holding questions. Once I heard her crying quietly in the shower. I pretended I didn't. Still, life moved like a river pretending not to know about the rocks beneath. We decorated for Christmas together, garland on the stairs, stockings with our names, even one for their dog. When we placed mine, Nora joked, You're part of the household now." I laughed, but something in her tone sounded like it was measuring how temporary that statement could be. Most days were good, though. I made lunches, folded laundry, watched cartoons with Daisy. Sometimes Darren would leave early and not come home until late, saying there was a meeting or a client dinner. I believed him because I wanted to. You see, when you're living under someone else's roof, you convince yourself not to notice too much. You pretend everything is fine so you don't risk being a problem. But one evening, while cleaning the kitchen, I found a piece of paper under the counter, an invoice from a hotel downtown. Darren's name was on it. For a split second, my stomach dropped. Then I reasoned it away. Maybe it was for work. Maybe he'd booked something for a client. I put it in the junk drawer and never mentioned it. That was the first warning sign I refused to see. Nora had her good days and her distant ones. Some mornings, she'd sit with me and talk about old times, about how she missed my cooking, about how she wanted to take Daisy to Disneyland next summer. Other mornings, she'd leave early without saying goodbye, just a curt, "See you tonight." I told myself she was stressed, that it wasn't me, that I wasn't intruding. The truth? I started walking on tiptoe in my own daughter's house. Every plate I washed too loudly. Every time I used the dryer too long, I'd flinch a little, afraid to be noticed the wrong way. But then Daisy would run up to me with paint on her fingers and hug my knees, saying, "Grandma, you're my best friend." And all the fear melted for a moment. There was one night in particular, a week before Christmas, when I caught Nora staring at her reflection in the oven door. We were baking cookies and she'd gone quiet mid-sentence. When I asked, "You okay, sweetheart?" she blinked, forced a smile, and said, "Yeah, just tired." But when I turned to put the tray in, I caught her looking at me again, not unkindly, but like she was seeing me through a fog she didn't want to admit was there. That was the moment I first felt it, a distance. Something fragile had shifted. I couldn't name it, but I could feel it in how the air moved between us. By the time the 24th rolled around, everything looked perfect from the outside. Lights, laughter, wrapping paper everywhere. But I kept thinking about that hotel invoice, about Nora's eyes in the oven door, about Darren's phone, always face down, and somewhere deep inside me, I knew. This wasn't just about losing a job or needing a place to stay. Something was unraveling that had nothing to do with me, and everything to do with the people I loved most. That's how quiet destruction begins, not with a bang, but with small, careful silences. And the cruel part? I didn't even know I was standing in the middle of it. It started with a sound. A faint creak late at night from the ceiling above my room, soft but steady, like someone pacing very slowly. At first, I thought it was the wind. The old maple tree out back sometimes brushed its branches against the siding, and the house would groan like it was dreaming. But this wasn't that kind of sound. It had rhythm, weight, hesitation between each step. I remember sitting up in bed, holding my breath, straining to listen. Then came the thump, small, deliberate, followed by a muffled scrape, like something being dragged across a floorboard. I wanted to believe it was nothing. I'd only been there a few weeks. I didn't want to be the nervous guest who made problems out of noises. So I lay back down, told myself old houses make old sounds. Still, sleep didn't come easy that night. The next morning, over coffee, I asked casually, "Do you ever hear noises in the attic?" Nora looked up from her laptop. "Attic? We don't really go up there." Darren didn't look up at all. He just said, "Yeah, probably squirrels. I've been meaning to get someone to check it out." His tone was light, too light. The kind of voice that's rehearsed for dismissal. And I noticed, for the first time, that he didn't make eye contact when he spoke to me. He kept stirring his coffee long after the sugar had dissolved. I smiled, nodded. "Ah, squirrels," I said, pretending to believe it. But something in my stomach had already begun to twist. That evening, when they went to bed, I stayed up to wrap gifts for Daisy. The house was quiet, except for the ticking of the old wall clock. And then the sound again. Above me this time, sharper now, like a box being moved. I froze, looked toward the ceiling. There was a faint smell in the air, too. Dust and something metallic. Maybe old paint, maybe something else. I told myself not to be ridiculous. Still, I found a flashlight and crept into the hallway. The pull string to the attic was right outside Daisy's room. I stood beneath it, looking up, that little wooden knob dangling in the dark like a question. I almost reached for it. Almost. Then I heard Daisy turn in her sleep, her soft little sigh drifting through the door. And something in me said, not tonight. Don't wake the house. So I went back to bed, but I didn't forget. The next day, Nora seemed distracted. She kept checking her phone, biting her lip. When I asked if she was okay, she said, "Yeah, just work stuff." But her smile didn't reach her eyes. Later, I was folding laundry when Darren came home early. I heard them whispering in the kitchen, low and urgent. Then silence. When I stepped in a few minutes later, they stopped talking altogether. "Everything all right?" I asked. "Yeah," Nora said quickly. "We were just figuring out the dinner plans." But there was no grocery bag, no meal started, no reason for that tension that hung in the air like static. Darren left soon after, muttering about a client meeting. And when the door closed behind him, Nora stood there, staring at it for a long moment. I wanted to reach out. I wanted to say, "Tell me what's wrong." But I didn't, because I was living in her house. Because pride has a strange way of silencing love. That night, while tucking Daisy into bed, she whispered, "Grandma, Daddy says Santa's hiding presents in the attic." I smiled automatically. "Oh, does he now?" She nodded. "But Mommy said not to go up there. She said it's dangerous." My heart gave a small, confused thump. Dangerous? When I asked her why, Daisy shrugged. "I don't know. She said there's sharp stuff up there. Nails and old boxes." I kissed her forehead, said goodnight, and smiled until I was out of the room. Once in the hallway, my pulse picked up again. Because in all the years I'd known Nora, she'd never been one for secrets. And now there was one hanging right above our heads. 2 nights later, the letters started again. A small envelope under my door, no name, same block letters. But this one didn't accuse. It warned. Don't trust what they say. The truth's up top. I stared at it for a long time, my throat dry. The words looked printed, like before, cut from a computer. I thought about showing Nora. I thought about tearing it up. Instead, I slid it into the drawer with the others. By morning, I'd convinced myself it was just some twisted prank. Maybe even a kid from down the street. But every time I walked through that hallway and saw that attic pull string, the words echoed. Up top, then came the stew. It was my recipe, the one my mother taught me, thick and simple and made with whatever you had left. I'd made a pot that morning, left it in the fridge to warm for dinner. That night, it was gone. In its place, a store-bought container of stew, sealed, labeled, neat. Too neat? Nora avoided my eyes when I asked about it. "Oh, I thought that was old," she said, her voice tight. I tossed it, but she hadn't tossed it. I could tell. I could feel the lie in the space between her words. And something inside me, something I hadn't felt since I was a girl, started to wake up. That quiet instinct that tells you you're being managed. I decided to look, but I told myself it was just curiosity. After everyone went to sleep, I slipped out of bed again. The floorboards under my feet groaned like they were trying to warn me off. I stood under that attic string, hand shaking, one small pull, and the stairs folded down with a slow creak. A faint smell drifted down. Dust, wood, and something else. Something sour and old. I lifted the flashlight and started to climb, but halfway up, I heard a voice, Nora's, sharp and panicked from behind me. "Mom, what are you doing?" I turned, startled. She stood in the hallway in her robe, eyes wide, pale as the moonlight hitting the floor. "I heard something," I said softly. "I thought maybe an animal got in." Her hands trembled slightly. "You shouldn't go up there, it's not safe." Then Darren appeared behind her, jaw tight, one hand on her shoulder. "She's right," he said. "We keep cleaning supplies up there. Old paint cans. It's toxic. Toxic. The word hung there, thick and final. I climbed back down. He reached up, shoved the ladder back, and closed the hatch with more force than necessary. And that was the moment, the exact one, when the air changed for good. Because their fear wasn't of the attic being unsafe. Their fear was of me seeing what was in it. That night, lying in bed, I couldn't stop hearing Darren's voice saying, toxic. The way his hand had gripped Nora's shoulder too tightly. The way she hadn't met my eyes. I knew then that something was wrong. But what I didn't know, what I couldn't have imagined, was how far that wrongness reached. The next morning, a small thing happened that sealed it. While tidying the living room, I found one of Darren's ties on the couch. It was a deep blue silk, expensive looking. When I lifted it, something fluttered out, a receipt. Another hotel, same name, same date as the night he'd said he was working late. I sat there, holding it, the pieces beginning to connect in ways I didn't want them to. So I made a decision, quietly, calmly. Before I left that house, before I went anywhere, I would see the attic for myself. Whatever was waiting up there, I needed to know. Because I was tired of guessing which part of my life had become the lie. I waited until the house slept. The kind of deep, post-midnight sleep where even the furnace sounds hesitant to interrupt. I lay in bed listening to nothing and everything. The faint hum of the refrigerator below, the soft breathing of my granddaughter down the hall, the occasional sigh from the pipes that felt almost human. When I was sure no one would wake, I slipped out of bed, barefoot, careful, my heart thudding in my chest like it wanted to call out and give me away. The attic pull string waited above me in the dark hallway. The same little wooden knob that had been haunting my dreams for days, I pulled it. The folding stairs came down with that dry, tired creak, a sound that somehow felt too alive. Dust fell in a slow drift, glowing in the moonlight like ash. I climbed one step, then another. My knees ached, but my curiosity was stronger. At the top, I switched on my flashlight. The beam cut through the dark, revealing shapes that looked more like shadows than objects at first. Boxes, old furniture, a chest half covered by a sheet. Nothing strange, nothing that should have made my skin crawl. But still, something was off. The air was wrong, too still, too heavy, like the attic itself was holding its breath. Then I saw the footprints in the dust. Fresh ones, 2 pairs, one heavier, one lighter, crisscrossing near the center of the floor. I crouched, ran my finger along one of them. The print was clean-edged, recent. Someone had been up here, recently and often. The chest was the first thing that caught my eye. Old, wooden, with a metal latch that had been replaced by a cheap new padlock. Next to it, a stack of boxes, one labeled Xmas Lights, another, baby stuff. I opened one. Inside, not decorations, but clothes, men's clothes. Shirts, jackets, neatly folded. None of them looked like Darren's usual style. They were rougher, worn. A few even had initials stitched inside the collars. RMI Froze. I didn't know anyone by those initials. Beneath the clothes was a folder. I opened it. Inside were papers, printouts of bank transfers, an envelope with cash, and a small photo. The photo stopped me. It was of Darren, at least I thought it was at first. But no, it wasn't. The face looked almost like him. Same hair, same build, but different eyes. You ever see someone who looks so much like another person it makes your mind skip a beat? That's what it felt like. Then I heard the floor creak, not above but below. A door opened. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming down the hallway. I turned off the flashlight, crouched, heart racing so fast I could hear it in my ears. The footsteps stopped beneath me. Then a whisper, Darren's voice. Mom? He was calling me. The words slid up through the floorboards like a trap. He sounded calm but not natural. It was the calm of someone rehearsed, someone who already knew the answer but wanted to watch you squirm toward it. I didn't answer. After a few seconds, his voice came again, lower this time. You shouldn't be up there. A long pause, then the sound of the hallway light switch. Light spilled through the cracks in the attic floor, cutting the dark into thin strips of gold. I stayed frozen, crouched behind a box, afraid to breathe. Finally, after what felt like forever, he walked away. The stairs groaned under his weight as he went back down. I stayed there for 10 more minutes, not moving. Then I switched the flashlight back on and turned to the chest again. I needed to see what was inside. I wasn't leaving without knowing. I found a screwdriver wedged between two beams and used it to pry at the latch. It took effort, and every small sound felt like thunder, but finally, click. The lock gave. I lifted the lid. Inside were dozens of envelopes, rubber banded together. All of them had my name on them. I picked one up, my hand shaking. They weren't sealed, just folded. The first note read, "She's starting to ask questions." The second, "Tell her it's temporary." The third, "Once she's gone, we'll be fine." And then one that made my vision blur. "Make sure Daisy doesn't see." They weren't written in the same hand as the typed letters I'd been getting. These were handwritten, rushed, familiar because it was Nora's handwriting. My knees gave out. I sat on the cold wood floor, the flashlight trembling in my hand. It didn't make sense. Why would she write these? Why would she keep them? Who were they for? At the bottom of the chest was another photo, this time unmistakably Darren, but younger, standing with a woman I didn't know. Her face was circled in pen, and on the back of the photo someone had written, "She knows too much." A chill ran through me so deep it felt like my bones turned hollow. I shoved the letters back into the chest, heart pounding, head spinning. I wanted to run, to get out of that attic, out of that house. But as I turned, the flashlight beam caught something else. A small box tucked behind the beams. I pulled it out, opened it. Inside, a phone. Old, cheap, prepaid. I pressed the power button. It lit up immediately. No password. Messages filled the screen. The most recent one, dated just 2 days ago, read, "It's done. She'll be gone by Christmas." I dropped the phone. My breath came in short, sharp bursts. The pieces started connecting. The lies, the whispering, the attic, the sudden eviction. They hadn't planned to help me. They'd planned to get rid of me, not in some dramatic way, but quietly. To erase me from their lives without a scene. The letters under my door weren't from a stranger. They were from someone inside this house. And now, the attic held proof. I started down the stairs, hands trembling so badly I nearly fell. But halfway down, I froze again. At the bottom of the steps stood Nora. Her eyes were wide, red-rimmed, and her mouth was pressed tight like she was swallowing words that would choke her if they came out. "Mom," she said, barely a whisper. "You weren't supposed to see that," my voice cracked. "What is all this, Nora? What are you doing? What is happening?" She shook her head, tears spilling now. "You don't understand. Then make me understand," I said. She took one small step closer. "It's not what you think. I was protecting you." I laughed, a sharp, broken sound. "Protecting me? By writing letters about getting rid of me? By planning to throw me out on Christmas?" Her face twisted, guilt and fear tangled together. "He made me do it," she whispered. "You don't know what he's capable of." Before I could answer, a shadow filled the hallway behind her. Darren. His expression was calm, too calm. He put a hand on her shoulder, the same way he had that night at the attic door. "Go to bed, Nora," he said. His voice was soft but final, the kind that leaves no space for argument. She hesitated, eyes flicking between us. "Now," he repeated. She turned and walked away, her sobs echoing faintly down the hall. And then it was just him and me. He smiled, that same polite, practiced smile that once looked charming. "Curiosity's a dangerous thing," he said, "especially when you don't know what you're looking for." Then, without another word, he reached up and pushed the attic stairs closed. The wooden hatch slammed shut between us. I backed away, my body shaking. My mind raced with everything I'd seen. The letters, the phone, Nora's face, Darren's calmness. I didn't know what was coming next. But I knew one thing for certain. Whatever was really happening in that house, I wasn't safe there anymore. And as I packed my bag in the quiet of that night, I promised myself something. If I walked out that door again, I wouldn't leave quietly this time. Next time, I'd make sure the truth followed me out. When morning came, it was hard to tell if I had actually slept. My body had for a few minutes at a time. My mind never did. I lay there with my eyes open, the ceiling spinning slow circles above me, replaying everything from the night before, Nora's tears, Darren's calm voice, the click of the attic hatch as it shut between us. I thought about running right then, just packing what I could carry and leaving. But fear wasn't my first emotion. It was disbelief, a kind that felt too big to fit inside me. So I did what I've always done in hard times. I made coffee. It's a small ritual, but it anchors me. When Nora came into the kitchen, her eyes were puffy, her lips dry from crying. She looked like a ghost of herself. Neither of us spoke at first. She just poured herself a cup, and we stood side by side like strangers at a bus stop, waiting for something neither of us wanted to arrive. Finally, I said softly, "I saw the letters, Nora." She closed her eyes. "I know. Why?" I asked. "Why would you write those things about me?" Her shoulders trembled. "Because he made me," she whispered. "He said he'd ruin us both if I didn't." "Ruin us how?" She looked around the kitchen as if the walls might be listening. "Money, Mom, all the money. The house, Daisy's college fund, everything. He said he'd disappear and leave us with his debts if I didn't go along with what he wanted." "What he wanted," I said slowly, "was to get rid of me?" She nodded, a single, helpless movement. I felt something cold slip down my spine. But underneath it was anger, a steady, quiet anger, the kind that doesn't shout or cry, just hardens. I wanted to scream at her, but I didn't. Not yet. Because the moment I looked at her, my daughter, shaking, trapped, I realized Darren wasn't just cruel. He was controlling. And if he'd been controlling her, I had no doubt he'd try to control me too. So instead, I reached for her hand. She flinched at first, then let me take it. "Okay," I said. "Then we're going to stop playing his game." She blinked. "What do you mean?" "I mean we're done being scared. You, me, we start paying attention. We find proof. And when we have enough, we take him down." Her eyes widened, half terrified, half hopeful. "Mom, he's smart. He's careful. He never leaves anything." "Everybody leaves something," I said. "You just have to look where they think you won't." That was the moment I stopped being a guest in that house and started being something else, a witness. The next few days passed like a play we were both pretending to still believe in. I kept cooking, cleaning, smiling at Daisy. Darren went to work, or said he did. Nora moved through the house like someone waiting for a storm she couldn't warn anyone about. But underneath the routine, I was watching. Every glance, every word, every phone call. I noticed things I hadn't before. The way Darren always kept his briefcase locked. The way he stored documents not in his office, but in a locked drawer in the guest room desk, the one I used to write letters on. The way he took the trash out himself every Thursday night and always shredded papers first. He thought he was clever, but clever people make the same mistake. They underestimate quiet women. I started my plan small. Each morning after Nora and Darren left for work, I would open the locked drawer with a thin butter knife and photograph whatever I found. Bank statements, receipts, printouts. Some of them showed large withdrawals, cash transfers, untraceable amounts, sent to names I didn't recognize. One, though, caught my eye. A wire transfer from Nora's clinic account to something labeled Hale Management Consulting. $10,000. I'd never heard her mention that name before. When I asked her that night, she froze. "That's Darren's side company. He said it was for tax purposes." But her face said she didn't believe it. Neither did I. While Nora distracted him in the evenings, I searched for the prepaid phone I'd found in the attic. It was gone. He must have realized I'd seen it, so he was hiding something new now. That made me nervous. But it also confirmed something important. He was scared too, and fear makes people sloppy. I started keeping notes, dates, times, what he said, what I saw. I wrote everything down in a small notebook I hid in the lining of my coat. On December 20th, I saw Darren come home late, around midnight. He went straight to the garage. I watched from the window as he moved something heavy from his trunk, something wrapped in a tarp, and carried it into the basement. The next morning, it was gone. When I asked about it casually, he smiled. Old tools, I dropped them at work, but there was no dirt on his shoes. That was when I knew I needed help. But who could I trust? If I went to the police without evidence, I'd sound like a bitter, broke mother-in-law making trouble. If I confronted Darren outright, he'd spin it into another reason to push me out, or worse. So I did the next best thing. I told the truth to someone who didn't know they were hearing it. At the grocery store, there's a clerk named Ella. Nice girl. Knows everyone in town. While she bagged my groceries, I told her, as if I were joking, my son-in-law's running a consulting firm from home. Doesn't even have a business card. She laughed but then said, "Oh, Hale Management? Yeah, they had a complaint at the bank last month. Something about fake accounts." That sentence stuck in my head like a spark catching dry wood. Fake accounts. That night, I waited until Darren went to bed. Then I went downstairs and checked the laptop he always kept in the study. He'd left it open, but locked with a password. I tried 3 guesses before it worked. Daisy 2020. I could have laughed if my hands weren't shaking. Inside, there were files labeled HMC, Hale Management Consulting, invoices, spreadsheets, emails, and one folder named Clients, Personal. When I opened it, I stopped breathing. Dozens of names, people from our town, every one of them, had a line beside it. Loan processed, payment delayed, contact denied. Amounts ranging from a few hundred to several $1,000s. He wasn't a consultant. He was running a scam. He'd been using fake identities to open accounts and borrow against them. And Nora's clinic money? It was all tangled in his mess. If it ever came out, she'd lose everything. I copied what I could onto a flash drive. My old hands were trembling, but I managed. I hid the drive in a tin of tea bags in my suitcase. That was my proof. That was my ticket out. But as I zipped the suitcase shut, something inside me cracked wide open. I realized that this wasn't just about saving myself. It was about saving my daughter and my granddaughter from the man they lived with. The next morning, I called a friend I hadn't spoken to in years, Carol from the hardware store. She answered, sleepy but cheerful. "Carol," I said, voice low, "if something ever happens to me, I need you to open an envelope I'll leave in your mailbox today." She went quiet for a long second. "Are you okay, Mary?" "I will be," I said. "I just need you to promise me." "I promise," she said softly. After we hung up, I printed a note. "If you don't hear from me by Christmas night, take this to the police." I tucked the flash drive inside, sealed it, and drove it to Carol's mailbox while Nora was at work. I told myself it was precaution, but deep down, I knew what I was really doing. I was setting the trap. When I got home that evening, Darren was already there, standing by the tree with a glass of wine. "Going somewhere, Mary?" he asked, eyes sliding toward my coat. "Just out for a drive," I said. "Needed air." He smiled, but his eyes didn't. "You shouldn't wander off alone. This time of year's dangerous." Something in the way he said dangerous made the hair on my neck stand up. I just nodded, forced a smile, and walked past him to the kitchen. Behind me, I heard the faint clink of his glass, the sound of him turning back toward the window. That's when I realized. He knew, I knew. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the dark, staring out the window, watching snow fall in the glow of the porch light. I thought about Nora as a child, how she'd once told me monsters weren't real. And I'd said, maybe not the kind that hide under beds. I'd never imagined she'd marry one that hides behind smiles. By dawn, I had made my choice. I wasn't going to run anymore. I was going to end it. Not with violence, not with fear, but with the one thing men like Darren can't fight: truth, in daylight, where everyone can see it. I didn't know how yet, but I had the evidence, the courage, and a plan forming like a shadow under the surface. And Christmas morning was only 2 days away. That would be the day everything changed. Christmas Day dawned soft and white, the kind of snow that covers everything in pretend innocence. I remember watching it fall from the kitchen window, my hands wrapped around a mug I didn't drink from. The coffee had gone cold, but I didn't care. My heart was already burning. Everything looked peaceful, the kind of peace that only exists right before something breaks. Daisy's laughter floated from the living room, Nora humming softly as she helped her open gifts. Darren stood by the tree, phone in hand, pretending to read messages. I knew he wasn't pretending about that part. He was checking, always checking, making sure his world stayed perfectly staged. But today, I was done playing the quiet extra in his show. Today, I would tear the curtain down. My plan was simple: evidence and exposure. No screaming, no threats, just truth, in front of the one person he couldn't manipulate: his daughter. I had made a few calls the night before, from a payphone near the Highway Motel. One to Carol, to tell her not to open the envelope yet, and one to a detective I'd known years ago through the hardware store, a customer named Donnelly. He'd retired, but he still knew people in the local precinct. I told him I had proof of financial fraud, that it involved local accounts, and that if he wanted a story that would make the front page, he should stop by 224 Ridgeview Lane around noon. He didn't ask many questions, just said, "I'll be there." At 11:30, Darren was setting the table for Christmas lunch. Ham, mashed potatoes, gravy, the works. I moved quietly, helping where I could, heart hammering. Then the doorbell rang. Darren frowned, checked his watch. "We're not expecting anyone." "I'll get it," I said. I opened the door, and there they were, Detective Donnelly and 2 uniformed officers standing on the porch in the snow. "Merry Christmas," Donnelly said with that old dry smile of his. "Mind if we come in for a moment?" Darren froze mid-step. "What is this?" I turned to him, calm as I could manage. "They're here to talk about your company, Darren. Hale Management." His face changed. Not shock, not confusion, but calculation. You could see the gears turning behind his eyes. "Excuse me?" he said, the perfect performance of polite disbelief. There must be some mistake. Donnelly didn't even blink. "We'll see about that. We've got a warrant to discuss a few accounts tied to your name." The room went still. Nora's hands dropped from where she'd been cutting bread. Daisy looked up, sensing something in the air she couldn't name. Darren laughed too loudly. "This is ridiculous. Someone's trying to—" He stopped when I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the flash drive. "This," I said, holding it up, "is everything you've been hiding. The bank accounts, the fake clients, the transfers you ran through Nora's clinic." His jaw tightened. "You went through my files?" "Yes," I said. "After you went through my life." He took a step toward me, slow and dangerous. "You have no idea what you're talking about." I took a step back, keeping my voice steady. "I know enough. Enough to save my daughter from you." The officers moved in, one to either side of him. "Sir," Donnelly said, "you can cooperate now, or we can do this the hard way." For a moment, I thought he'd try something desperate. His eyes darted toward the hallway, toward the back door. But then he smiled again, the same false, practiced smile. "You're making a mistake," he said quietly. "You'll regret this." "Maybe," I said, "but not as much as you will." As they read him his rights, he turned his head toward Nora. "Tell them it's a misunderstanding, honey. Tell them up, but she didn't move. She just stared at him, pale and trembling. When he said her name again, her voice came out small but certain. I can't, Darren. Not anymore. That broke him more than the handcuffs did. For the first time, his mask cracked. He looked at her, not angry, not pleading, just stunned. Like he'd finally seen something he couldn't control. They led him out through the front door, his footprints cutting deep into the snow. The house was silent except for Daisy's small voice. Mommy, why are the police taking Daddy? Nora dropped to her knees, pulling her daughter close. Because Daddy did something wrong, sweetie. But it's over now. And she looked up at me, eyes full of tears and something else I hadn't seen in years. Gratitude. I knelt beside them, brushing Daisy's hair back. It's going to be okay, I said softly. It has to be now. An hour later, after the police left, the house felt strangely hollow. The decorations still glowed. The ham still sat half-carved on the table, but everything had shifted. Nora sat on the couch, hands shaking, staring at the tree. He said he was doing it for us, she whispered, that it was just business, that nobody was getting hurt. He was hurting you, I said. And if I hadn't seen it, he would have kept hurting both of us. She nodded slowly, tears streaking down her face. I thought he loved me. He did what men like that call love, I said. Control, dressed up as protection. We sat there in silence for a long time. Eventually, Daisy came over and climbed into my lap. She didn't understand everything, but she understood enough that Grandma wasn't leaving, that the bad feeling in the house had lifted. Outside, sirens faded down the hill. Inside, the lights on the tree blinked in steady rhythm, like a heartbeat that had finally calmed. Later that afternoon, Donnelly called from the station. They'll be holding him overnight, he said. Looks like your hunch was right. The accounts, the money, it's all there. You saved your daughter from a hell of a mess, Mary. Thank you, I said. And Merry Christmas, he chuckled. You sure made it one to remember. When I hung up, I looked around the quiet house. The snow outside, the open presents, the faint smell of cinnamon still hanging in the air. Everything looked normal again, but nothing felt normal. I'd thought exposing Darren would bring instant peace, but peace doesn't arrive on command. It comes slowly, one breath at a time. Still, as I watched Nora tuck Daisy in that night, whispering soft promises about better days ahead, I felt something shift inside me. Not triumph. Not even relief. Just the deep, honest ache of survival. Before bed, I stepped out to the porch. The cold bit at my skin, but I stayed, breathing in the sharp night air. The world was quiet. I looked up at the attic window, the same dark square that had once terrified me. Now it was just a window again. Empty. Harmless. And for the first time since losing my job, I didn't feel lost. I felt free. I don't know how long I stood there, but I remember whispering into the night. You almost took everything from us, Darren. But you forgot something. You can't outsmart the truth forever. Then I went back inside, closed the door, and let the warmth of my home, the real home, wrap around me. The house was too quiet after the sirens stopped visiting. Not the heavy, secret kind of quiet that had haunted it before. This was different. Softer. Empty in a good way. Like a wound starting to scab. For the first few days after Darren's arrest, we moved like ghosts. Nora and I barely spoke above a whisper, afraid we might wake something that had finally gone still. Daisy asked for her father every morning, and every morning Nora found a new way to explain without breaking her little heart. Daddy's away for a while, she'd say gently, brushing Daisy's hair. But Grandma and I are right here, okay? And Daisy, with all the grace only a child can have, would nod and ask if Santa could still come next year. That question broke us both. 2 days after Christmas, Nora finally opened the blinds. The light spilled across the floor, touching the toys, the wrapping paper still scattered under the couch, the half-finished puzzle we'd ignored for weeks. I watched her from the kitchen table. She looked 10 years older, but also lighter somehow. Feels strange, she said quietly. Like the house is breathing again. It is, I said. So are we, she turned, eyes glassy but focused. Mom, I don't know how to thank you, I shook my head. Don't, just live honest from now on. That's thanks enough. She came over, took my hand. You could have left. When I told you to go, you could have just walked away. I smiled sadly. Mothers don't walk away, Nora, not really. We wait until our children find their way back. The following week was a blur of paperwork, statements, and calls from lawyers. The police had confirmed what the files suggested. Darren's consulting firm had been a front for fraud. He'd stolen money from investors, funneled funds through fake names, even used Nora's clinic accounts to hide transactions. It would take months to untangle everything, but at least she wouldn't lose her business. The detectives said the proof I'd given them was strong enough to clear her name entirely. When Nora told me, she started to cry again. Not the broken kind this time, but the kind that comes from relief. He really fooled me, Mom, for years. People like him, I said gently. Don't just lie to others. They lie to themselves first. She nodded, wiped her face, and whispered, Never again. The community reacted in waves. First shock, then sympathy. Then that awkward kindness people offer when they don't know what to say. Neighbors left casseroles, notes, even toys for Daisy. Everyone wanted to believe that good people can come back from terrible luck. Sometimes I'd catch Nora sitting at the window in the evenings, watching the snow melt on the porch, and I'd see her expression soften bit by bit. She'd been living under fear so long that calmness felt foreign. And me? I started job hunting again, not because I needed to, but because I wanted to feel useful. The hardware store owner, the one who'd restructured me out of a paycheck, called one day to say the new hire wasn't working out. Any chance you'd come back part-time? He asked. I laughed. I'll think about it. He didn't need to know I'd already decided yes. Sometimes redemption comes in small circles, not grand gestures. Evenings became peaceful again. We'd cook simple meals, watch TV, and laugh at nothing in particular. Daisy would curl up beside me on the couch, head heavy on my arm, whispering, Grandma, are we safe now? And every time I'd answer the same, Yes, sweetheart. We're safe now. But inside, I always added a second truth, because I finally stopped being quiet. In January, we visited Darren once. It was Nora's decision. She said she needed closure, and I agreed to go for her sake. The county jail was gray and sterile, the kind of place that drains warmth from your bones. He looked smaller behind the glass, stripped of his pressed suits and easy charm. When he picked up the phone, his first words weren't, I'm sorry. They were, You destroyed me. Nora's hand trembled, but her voice didn't. No, Darren. You did that yourself. He tried to hold her gaze, but she didn't give him the satisfaction. She put the phone down, stood, and walked away. I followed her out without looking back. In the car, she gripped the steering wheel so hard her knuckles turned white. Then she let out a long, shaky laugh, the kind that sounds like crying at first. That's it, she whispered. That's the last time he'll ever touch any part of my life. And I knew she was right. By February, the snow had melted into gray slush, and the maple tree in the backyard stood bare again. But even without leaves, it looked strong. Rooted, still standing. We started planning small things, repainting Daisy's room, fixing the leaky faucet, signing up for swimming lessons. Ordinary life. The kind we used to take for granted. Sometimes I'd catch myself thinking about that attic. The dust, the boxes, the smell of fear that used to live up there. Now it was empty, clean. We turned it into storage for toys and old photo albums. Every time I climbed those stairs, I reminded myself, that's what truth does. It empties the dark places. On the day the bank officially cleared Nora's accounts, we celebrated with takeout Chinese and bad Christmas movies, even though it was March. Daisy laughed so hard at a snowman scene she spilled her noodles all over the couch, and instead of scolding her, Nora just laughed too. That sound, the honest, unguarded laughter of my daughter, was the first real sign that we'd made it through. Later that night, when everyone was asleep, I sat by the window again with a blanket and a cup of tea. The street was quiet, the stars clear. I thought about everything we'd lost and everything we'd somehow still managed to save. My job, my home, my pride, but also my family. Even after everything, it was still here, bent but not broken. I realized then that survival isn't about winning. It's about deciding that the story isn't over yet, and though I still woke up sometimes to the ghost of that attic sound, I'd roll over, remind myself, that was then. Now, there's no secret left to keep. It's funny, the things you remember once the dust settles. Not the big dramatic moments, not the police cars, not the shouting, not even the day the truth finally burst out into the light. No. What sticks are the quiet ones. The first morning you wake up and realize the air doesn't feel heavy anymore. The way the house smells when peace finally decides to come home. It took me months to stop replaying that Christmas. For a long time, every blinking light or police siren would send my heart racing. But healing is sneaky. It doesn't announce itself. It creeps in quietly through ordinary things. Through laughter over breakfast. Through Daisy's drawings on the fridge. Through the sound of Nora humming again while washing dishes. Now, when I look at my daughter, I don't see the scared woman who once stood on the porch and told me to leave. I see someone who found her way back to herself. And I suppose that's the real miracle in this story. Not justice, not revenge, but redemption. Sometimes I still think about Darren. Not with hate. I think hate keeps you tethered to people who don't deserve the space. I think about him as a lesson, a reminder of how charm can disguise rot, and how silence can become its accomplice. He taught me something I wish I'd learned earlier. Being kind doesn't mean being blind. When you love people, you want to believe their better sides. You build stories around them, decorate those stories with excuses, and call it loyalty. But real love, I've learned, includes the courage to face the truth, even when it shatters the picture you wanted so badly to keep. I've rebuilt a small life again. Nothing fancy, but full of peace. I'm back at the hardware store a few mornings a week. The regulars still come in, still tell the same jokes, and I still laugh. Only now the laughter feels cleaner. I help Nora with Daisy when I can, and sometimes, when the little one curls up beside me with a book, she'll whisper, "Grandma, tell me the Christmas story again, the one where you saved us." And I'll smile, tuck the blanket around her, and say, "It wasn't about saving anyone, sweetheart. It was about remembering who we are when the lights go out." If you've listened this far, thank you. I know my story isn't shiny or perfect. It's messy, it's human, and maybe that's why it matters. Because every family has a quiet place where something once went wrong. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is climb the stairs, even when you're terrified of what you'll find at the top. So if you're listening from somewhere dark, somewhere heavy, somewhere that feels like it's closing in, hear this. The truth may break you for a moment, but it will build you again, stronger, clearer, freer, and one day, you'll look back and realize that the pain you thought would end you was just the beginning of your becoming. Did you like my story? Please like and subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I want to know how far this story of mine travels, and if there's one thing I want to leave you with, it's this. Even when the world throws you out in the cold, don't forget, love built on truth will always find its way home.